Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of Rankin Technical College's AWD, or Application Web Development Program, and in particular for the AWD 1111 .NET Framework with Web Databases class, I'm starting to go through a series of presentations for the fall 2019 semester based on the textbook that you see in front of you. That is ProASP.NET MVC 5. And so far I've done a couple lectures. The first one was on Chapter 1, putting ASP.NET MVC in context. But rather than going on to Chapter 2, your first MVC application, I did a video that was about 16 minutes long, although it took me well over an hour, to uninstall Visual Studio Community Edition 2017 and install Visual Studio Community Edition 2019. So that's kind of where I am right now. And if I come through here, and I'm going to do that, I'm going to click over here, and I'm going to go down, and what you'll see is I now have STUV, Visual Studio 2019. Alright, so I'm going to click on that, brings it up, colorful new interface on here, and I guess I don't like this because it's not as big as it used to be, so I'm going to come in and create a new project, I believe. So it comes in and it says, what do I want to do here? Console app, .NET Core, ASP.NET Core Web, WPF, class library, Azure. Looks like there's a lot more in here. Blank solution, console app. I want this. So as you start to make your way down, I want ASP.NET Web Application, .NET Framework, C#. Windows, etc. So I'm going to choose that one, and I'm going to click Next. So it asks for the name of the project. Well, first thing I like to change all the time is I want to save this to my desktop. Alright, so I'm going to change the folder to the desktop. Sometimes when that happens, you may get an error. You may have to do it a couple times. Now, the name of the project, they want us to call this Party Invites. So that will be the name of the project. Project name, Party Invites. There's a location. The solution name by default is the same name as the project name. I'm going to change this to the name of our textbook. So, Pro ASP.NET 5 MVC Chapter 02. Really too long, but you get the idea. Place the solution in the project in the same directory. Solution intro. I don't know. Never had to really think about doing that before. Solution in the project. I'm just going to leave it because by default it's not checked, so I'm going to click Create. And it comes in and asks me what kind of ASP.NET web solution I want to create. You'll notice that it looks different, and it will look different from what's in our textbook. Alright, so I just did go in and prepare Visual Studio. I created a new project. I did choose ASP.NET Web Application Project Template. Again, it looks different because we're using the 2019. I called it Party Invites. I guess I could have used their solution name, which was just Chapter 2, but it's still fine. Alright, and we're asked in here, in the dialog, it says it asks you to set the initial content. Alright, and it looks as though what we're going to do is choose empty and MVC. What that will do, just so you're aware of it, if we chose MVC, All right. The MVC would be checked automatically. But if we chose MVC, then we would be able to come in here and change our authentication. Since we're choosing empty, we have to manually check the MVC button, and we cannot change the authentication. So it looks like we want empty with MVC. Now they go through all this, and they talk about what you get when you do different things. But the author says, I'm going to keep things simple. Select empty, check the MVC box. All right, this will create a basic MVC project, but it'll have minimum predefined content. In other words, just enough to get you started. All right. Now it says the other project template options are intended to give you a more complete starting point. I don't like these because they encourage developers to treat some important features such as authentication as black boxes. In other words, that you don't really care. All right, that you don't need to know it. The author's goal in this book, as he says, is to give you the knowledge to understand and manage every aspect of the MVC application. So for most examples in the book, the author will choose the empty template. All right, so this is what we should get. Let's double check. So we're going to come over here. We're going to check empty. All right, add folders and core references, MVC. All right. This thing was put in here by default to configure for that. I'm just going to leave it the way it is. All right, and I'm going to click Create. All right, the project, looks like it's gone, but there we go. And if let's make this smaller, a lot smaller. All right, and what you'll notice, got the party invites. They didn't put a different solution name. Properties, references, app data, app start. And all app start had is in it is a simple route config. Controllers, which is an empty folder. Models, which is an empty folder. Views, which has in it only a web.config. Global.asax, packages.config, and web.config. The reason that I took the time to show you that was not just for you, but for me also. And what I mean is, what I wanted to make sure of was once we're moving here to Visual Studio 2019, will it still look the same when we start? And it looks like it did. All right, it says you can now try to run the application by selecting Start Debugging, and we should get an error. And the reason that we should get an error on this is under Views, we don't have a CS/HTML file. But I will, again, File, Save All, and let's try to run it. Again, we should get an error message doing this here. We should get an error message. And I'm literally just following the steps that are in our textbook. Okay? It says the project is configured to use SSL. To avoid SSL warnings in the browser, you can choose to trust the self-signed certificate. Would you like to trust it? I'll say yes, and don't ask me again. You are about to install a certificate from a certification authority claiming to represent localhost. Do you want to install this? Sure. Never had to do this before, but I'm showing you things because it's probably the same thing that you will have to do. Again, I'm thinking once this runs, if it's true to form with the way things used to be, I'm going to get an error message. in here. Because again, I don't have a starting point, an index.cshtml or some other kind of file to run. So I'm thinking once this thing finishes loading, I'm going to get an error message, such as the one that's shown on the bottom of page 14 in the text that says the resource cannot be found. And there it is, the same error. All right, so let's stop the run by just closing this and clicking up here if we have to. It doesn't look like we have to. All right, so we stop the debugging. All right, again, I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between the PDF, all right, and my actual code. So, as you have seen, Visual Studio opens the browser to display the project. The default browser is Visual Studio. Is that the case? All right. Notice mine says Google Chrome. Now, yours may say something else. All right. But mine may have said Chrome because that may be the default now. Mine may have said Chrome because that's how it was set up for Visual Studio 2017. You'll notice if you come over here, you can change it to Chrome. Sorry about that. So I can come over here and change it by clicking this down arrow to Chrome, IE, or Edge. I'm going to leave it at Chrome. I find that Chrome is, in my humble opinion, the most stable browser there is. I just like it the most. All right. So the author's using that. That's fine. The author's going to use IE11. All right. So the first thing we're supposed to do in here is to add our first controller. As it says in MVC architecture, incoming requests. So those are hypertext transfer protocol or HTTP requests that come in once the user either enters a URL into his or her address bar or they click a hyperlink. All right. As it says in ASP.NET MVC, controllers are just C# classes, which virtually all will inherit from the controller class. All right. Each public method in the controller is known as an action method. So in other words, it's designed so that when you perform some kind of an action, it's what you want to have happen based on the results of that. The MVC convention, as it says, is to put controllers in a controllers folder. The convention also, the thing that is expected by the system is that you have all your controllers will end with the word controller. All right. So to add a controller, we right-click on the controllers folder, choose Add, as shown here, right there. So again, I'm going to right mouse click on my controllers. I'm going to choose Add and Controller. All right. Once it comes up, it looks like this. The good news, in my opinion, is this looks pretty much the same as it did in Visual Studio 17. In other words, I can create, and we're only concerned with the MVC stuff for now at least. All right. And I can either create an empty controller, a controller that has read-write actions, or kind of a full-fledged controller that will allow me to interact virtually right away with the EF or the entity framework, which will give me CRUD operations and write a lot of code for me. All right. So my guess is they're going to make an empty one in here, but I will double check to be sure. That's not what I want. That is okay. Select MVC5 controller empty, which is what I'm going to do. All right. Click the empty option, and the Add Controller dialog will appear. Set the name to Home Controller and click Add. All right, so we want the empty. Click Add. When it comes up with this little dialog, change that to home controller. Again, hopefully you noticed the only thing that was darkened there was the word default. Keep the word controller on the end. The system is expecting that. So I've changed it to home controller. All right, but I want to show you something. They do mention it in the book, but I want to say it to you myself. And that is, once I come in here and I click this, notice that right now under views, the only thing there is web config, and there's nothing under controller. As soon as I go in and actually click the add button, that's going to create a file in here that's called homecontroller.cs. It will also create an empty folder under the views called home. It will be empty because I chose for this to be an empty controller. So click add. And momentarily we'll see our homecontroller.cs there and our empty folder. All right, let me make this a little bigger, in fact a lot bigger. And this looks very similar, if not identical, to the way it has been. All right, notice my namespace, which says the name of my project, which is Party Invites, and where I am, which is in the controllers folder. We have just created a home controller. Again, as previously mentioned, home controller, virtually every controller inherits from, that's the colon, the controller class, which is defined under system.web.mvc. All right, hopefully you're starting to see how, and we'll continue to see how this stuff all comes together. All right, so we created that new file. All right. Says a good way of getting started with MVC is to make a couple of changes to the controller class. Now, what's important about this is once we make these changes that are shown right here, we're going to do that. But so far with what we're doing, we're using the controller. We don't have a model. We're not doing anything with a model. We have not yet created a view. We're not doing anything with a view. So we are using the controller as the controller and as the model and as the view. Now, normally you would not do that. The reason that we are doing it that way, though, is just so that we can, for lack of better words, kind of ease our way into this. All right? Now, look at this. These using statements are basically designed to bring in code. I don't know if they're libraries or not, but to bring in code so we're able to use it. This using system.web.mvc, I believe, was automatically put in there because we chose controller. All right? What you'll probably find, at least the way it used to be, see these are gray, which means they aren't being used right now. So I could go ahead and click on the light bulb here and choose remove any of these unnecessary. I'm just going to leave them in there. All right, it doesn't hurt to have them in there even if you're not using them. But the only one that is being used right now is the one in black. All right, and I'm at 18 minutes. I think this is a good place to stop. I'd like to make all of these 20 minutes or less so that, for lack of better words, they're kind of in bite-sized chunks. So I'll be back with Part 2, Chapter 2, Part 2, in just a couple minutes.